When I was getting ready to facilitate this, I wanted to ask each of the facilitators one central question, and that was, what is your absolute non-negotiable? When you're thinking about children's faith formation, what's one of your essentially important non-negotiables? So our first presenter is Dr. Joseph White, and Dr. Joseph White said this: the non-negotiable for me is multi-sensory active learning approach that leads to developmentally appropriate content and more inclusivity for learners. So let's welcome Dr. Joseph White and see if his non-negotiable shows up.
Okay, so I want to start by saying this. Nothing about this presentation focused on children should imply that the families shouldn't also be involved at every stage of the catechetical process, because I think that family catechesis is essential. Parents and families are the most important people in the lives of children, and if we really want to form them well, we have to get involved with their families. So I want to encourage you here, before we begin, to go to the next session with Dr. Kathy Amity about family formation, because if you work with children, you should also be working with families. I also think that there is a great argument, and I'm going to present it today, for doing some age-level work with children at the same time. It's not an either or, but a both and. And that argument for me comes from what we now know about child development. We have learned so much more than we knew before, just in the last 20 or 30 years, about how children grow and develop, especially brain development, which has, our knowledge of brain development has really boomed because of some of the neuroimaging techniques that have become now standard practice and have really helped us do a lot more research into how the brain grows. But I want to begin with this idea that development is multifaceted. We're not just talking about cognitive development or intellectual development when we talk about developmentally appropriate practices. That is one part of it, but we also are talking about social development, emotional development, moral development, and spiritual development, that all of these things follow their own trajectories that might be correlated with each other, but also distinct in certain ways. And all of these things originate in the brain. We think of the brain as the thinking part of our body, but really the brain is the control center for our body. So everything else is also originating in the brain. Our social relationships, our feelings, our emotions, even our motor skills, they all happen first in the brain. And here are some key findings on brain development in the last several years. So we used to have this debate in the area of human development: is it primarily nature or is it primarily nurture that influences the development of the person? Is it nature or nurture? Is it genes or is it environment that leads us to be the kind of people we turn out to be? Science has now definitively answered this question, and the answer is yes. It's both of those things, and in fact, it's a complex interaction between genes and environment. We have genetic predispositions, but sometimes also the environment brings out some of those genetic predispositions. Also, physical development is influenced by early experiences, both the environment in utero as well as the environment of the child after birth, especially in those early years, because we, as a species, give birth to babies whose brains are not fully formed yet. In fact, as a species, we have the largest brains as a proportion of our body mass, and so if we let the brains finish growing before birth, then birth would be even more painful than it is now. Because we have to have babies be born before the head gets that big. We have to wait and let the brain continue to develop even after birth. You'll see animal species like horses or giraffes be born and be standing kind of wobbly on those legs within the first day or two of life. That doesn't happen for human babies, because there's a lot of brain development that still needs to happen. So early experiences contribute significantly to the structure of the brain and its capacities. The environment affects the physical. there. The quality, the quantity, and the consistency of stimulation affects how the brain grows. And early interactions, how we relate and respond, directly affect how the brain is wired. I was once listening to a talk by Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a child neuropsychiatrist who's done some groundbreaking work in development and how it relates to the growth of the brain. And Dr. Perry said, you know how, all of you are probably kid people, or you wouldn't have chosen this particular seminar here. So you know how when you're in the grocery line, sometimes parents will, be pushing a cart or kind of holding a baby over their shoulder, and they're facing the checkout, but the baby is facing you, right? And the baby, who hasn't been taught yet that it's not polite to stare, is looking at you like this. And the baby is going, who is this? I haven't seen this one before, right? And what do? You smile, you wave at the baby, sometimes the baby smiles back, right? And Dr. Perry said, always do that. Because here's what's happening in the brain at that time. One of the areas of the brain that's growing most rapidly for that baby is the attachment relationship area of the brain. And so he said, when you do those, what we call reciprocal social interactions like that, the baby looks at you, you smile, the baby smiles back, we can actually see new connections growing together in that attachment relationship area of the brain. When that happens, new little dendrites and axons from the neurons growing together and forming a neural pathway for a relationship. Isn't that amazing? So the quantity, the quality, and the consistency of stimulation affect how the brain is wired. And kids learn in the context of relationships. Brain development doesn't necessarily have to be linear. It doesn't have to happen in a set order. And also learning can continue across the lifespan. But in neurotypical children, there is kind of a sequence that development usually happens, and there are particular windows of opportunity. Now, if any of you have, I know some of you probably have a background in education, maybe you have taken courses in child development where you learned about a Russian developmental theorist named Vygotsky. Does that sound familiar to anybody? So Vygotsky talked about zones of proximal development, that kids reach this point where they are just ready to master a new concept if they have the right environmental support, right? Which he called scaffolding. That if that adult is there to provide the scaffolding, they can master this new concept. If they're in that zone, it's called the zone of proximal development. Now, Vygotsky would argue that if we introduce the concept before the zone of proximal development, like say we're trying to teach a 12-month-old or a 14-month-old how to tie shoes, right? We think, well, they can stand up now. Surely they can tie their shoes, right? But what's going to happen? They're not going to have the slightest idea what we want them to do. And they might get frustrated with it, right? They would get frustrated if they tried to tie a shoe at that age. They don't have the motor skills or the motor planning yet to do that, right? But today, we have all kinds of Velcro for kids, right? So many of us learned to tie our shoes when maybe we were 5 or 6 years old. Kids today can go until they're 8, 9, 10 and not know how to tie shoes, and they're not particularly interested in learning how either, right? I mean, we can just, even if we have laces, we can just knot those laces on the sides and walk around with them. It's easier than learning how to tie it, right? So we can introduce the concept too early, and kids are frustrated. We can wait too long, and they're not engaged in learning about it anymore. We want the zone of proximal development. So anyway, what I want to say, that Vygotsky was like 100 years ago. But more recently, people like Dr. Bruce Perry, who have observed in these new imaging techniques how the brain grows, have shown that Vygotsky was right, that there are certain areas of the brain that correspond with certain kinds of skills that develop in a particular order. And he calls this theory the neurosequential model of the brain. The brain develops from bottom to top generally. So the brainstem and the diencephalon develop first. That's because those are responsible for some of the most basic functions, in fact, the brainstem especially, of survival. So circulation and breathing, stuff like that, depends on a healthy brainstem. If we don't have a healthy brainstem, we can't survive. So this part of the brain is finished growing typically at birth, or the baby's going to need some pretty intensive care. As we move up, then we're talking about drives like hunger and thirst and the sleep-wake cycle, which we know sometimes is not fully developed in the newborn, right? And doesn't get developed for a couple of months. So this part of the brain is still growing. But as we keep growing, then we get into the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain, also responsible a lot for attachment and relationship. A lot of those feelings around attachment relationship happen here in the limbic system. And then as we continue to grow, the neocortex of the brain, which is responsible for learning lots of new words and new concepts and things like that, and that part of the brain continues to grow. So we do have particular windows of opportunity, just like Vygotsky hypothesized in his work. And we can see that for various kinds of skills, including motor development, early sounds, music, thinking skills. There usually is an optimal window. There's also a next best opportunity and a period where further wiring may or may not be possible for us. For example, I couldn't today learn to do an Olympic sport the way the Olympians could, even if I did a lot of strength training. Why? Because my brain is past the point where I can really be in the right window to learn that, right? And if somebody doesn't, has, blinders on their eyes for the first several years of life, vision can't develop quite the same way either. If somebody lived in a dark cave for several years and then came out, they probably wouldn't be able to see. But other things, we can learn new languages, yes. Can we learn to speak a new language without a detectable accent? No. Not if we wait after a certain age, because learning new sounds that might only exist in another language than ours, than our primary language, would be hard to do at that point. That's why we try to expose kids to the sounds of other languages when they're young, if we want them to learn new languages. I'm going to argue today in the next, 15 minutes that I have, that there are windows of opportunity also for concepts in our faith. That there are particular windows, optimal windows to learn certain concepts, which is why I said there is an argument to be made for age-level, developmentally sequenced faith formation that accompanies the family formation that we do together. So here are some key windows of opportunity in childhood and adolescence. I mentioned earlier that early childhood is when the attachment relationship area of the brain is growing at its fastest. First, we have that attachment to our primary caregiver or caregivers, right? That attachment that Bowlby and Ainsworth talked about, usually in reference to mother-infant attachment. But now Sir Richard Bowlby, the son of John Bowlby, who did that groundbreaking work in attachment with Mary Ainsworth, has continued that research and found that actually, yes, it's possible for kids to have dual primary attachments, and really optimal for them to have those dual primary attachments to two primary caretakers, perhaps their parents. And then after that, they begin to form secondary attachments to other family members, extended family, also to friends and to teachers in preschool as they step out into the wider world. They form some attachments there as well. But the primary task of early childhood really is forming those attachments. Now, years ago, Sherry Waddell wrote a book called Forming Intentional Disciples, where she showed us that 53% of adults in the U.S. leave the faith of their childhood. And she said, now we think some of those come back, right? Well, 9% come back. So 44% leave and stay gone, which sounds depressing, right? And it's even worse for Catholics than it is in the general numbers. But one of the things she concluded from that is, it seems that Americans are not particularly attached to their faith. When I heard the word attached there, I started thinking about this. And I thought, well, what would make them attached to their faith? Well, we want to introduce Jesus Christ and the Christian community in early childhood, because that's when the attachment and relationship area of the brain is growing at its fastest. We've all known young people who have started formal religious education in, say, first or second grade, and maybe even continued every year through high school and then left the church. And we think, what's going on here? They know their faith. And the fact is, they know their faith because they started their faith formation in a time when the neocortex is growing at its fastest, and they could learn a lot of terms and a lot of facts about the faith and a lot of definitions and memorize a lot of prayers. But were they ever attached to their faith? What if we begin in these early years, really accompanying parents after baptism? What if we took the hand of that family at baptism and didn't let go? And we continued working with those young children during this time and helped them form an attachment to Jesus and the church precisely at the time that the attachment relationship area of the brain was growing at its fastest. In first grade and second grade, kids tend to be very concrete thinkers. They kind of have to see it to understand it and experience it to understand it. They also have a lot of rule-based thinking. They've learned that the world works according to rules. So very often they want to know what the rules are. And they call you out if you're breaking the rule. How many have ever substitute taught in a second grade or first grade class? What happens if you do something different from what you ordinarily do? They say, oh, that's not the way we do it. Hey, wait. And also first graders are notorious tattletales, right? If somebody is getting into something on the other side of the room, even if it doesn't have anything to do with them, they're like, teacher, look over there. It's like it's agonizing for them because they organize their conception of the world according to rules. And if somebody is breaking the rules, their little world is falling apart in that moment. They need you to reinforce those rules. So this is a great time for them to begin to learn some facts of our faith, to understand, this is usually their first exposure in second grade to things like the commandments and things like that. They learn about the sacraments, but what they learn about the sacraments is very concrete and practical. This is how we celebrate the sacraments. This is what this means, right? We want them to have a deeper experience of that as they grow, and that's why fifth grade and beyond is pretty important too. We'll talk about that in a minute. In third grade, young people in third grade, the developmental theorist Harry Stack Sullivan called this time the chumship stage. It's when peers become much more important and adults become a little less important. Kids start having really close bonds with best friends, right? And so what do we want to do? What do we want to focus on? What's our window of opportunity in third grade? It's again the Christian community, right? Helping them understand who we are together as a community of disciples, helping them understand the church. They're also gaining an understanding of the world that exists beyond their little world. And so learning about the universal church is something that we can do at that time. In fourth grade, this is the beginning of internalizing moral decision making. Up to this point, kids very often make decisions about what to do based on, will I get punished for this or will I get reinforced for that? Will people be glad I did that and something good happens, or does something bad happen? This is the time that they begin to internalize some of those rules, or at least that they have the opportunity to do that. There are still many adults walking around with first grade moral reasoning, and we've met them, right? But we would hope that beginning here in the fourth grade, that they can begin to kind of internalize and have their inner ideas of what is right and wrong, so that even if they're with a peer who says, hey, let's do this, that they can go, oh, that wouldn't be very nice. We can't do that. So that's the beginning. So we want to go back into, again, what it means to live as disciples in fourth grade. Go back into the commandments, but especially dive into the Beatitudes and talk about what does it mean to cultivate the heart of a disciple? What does it mean to follow Jesus? In fifth and sixth grade, kids are getting a better sense of sign and symbol. Up to then, they're very concrete, but this is the first moment where they can really begin to understand sign and symbol in a very clear way. So we want to dive back into the sacraments, and instead of having we've got too many Catholics who are adults running around with their second grade understanding of the Eucharist. We don't want that. We want them to keep growing and to understand it on a more deep level. And this is our first opportunity to do that. Also, they've really grown in reading skills, especially by sixth grade. So it's a great time to dive into sacred scripture and help them understand the continuity of God's plan in sacred scripture, to understand that we didn't have, as I thought growing up in an evangelical tradition, that there was this kind of angry God in the beginning, and then he just completely, changed his mind, and and sent this merciful, loving Jesus. That in reality, all of this stuff makes sense altogether, and God had one plan of salvation throughout human history, and that we can see that in sacred scripture, that continuity of sacred scripture. In middle school, wow, I almost forgot the most important window of opportunity at this time. So there are two ages that social scientists say that kids think about their future selves, two times. One is at age 17, and that makes sense because they're about to turn 18, and so everybody's asking them, what do you want to do when you grow up? You're going to go to school, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a job, what kind of job do you want to have? Sometimes we're asking because we're afraid maybe they haven't thought about it, right? But the other age when they're most likely to think about what kind of adult they will be might surprise some folks, and that's at age 11. But it makes sense if you think about it, because there's a lot of physical growth happening at that time. Kids can no longer look in the mirror, usually at age 11, without realizing, I'm not going to be a little girl or a little boy forever. I'm becoming something else. I'm becoming a man. I'm becoming a woman. And so they begin to think, what kind of man will I be? What kind of woman will I be? This is a brilliant window of opportunity for what? For vocation, right? Very often we go to those 17-year-olds, we try to talk to them about vocations, but the ones who are some of the brightest, most talented kids, they've already got a life plan, right? They already know what they're doing. What if we planted the seed much earlier on, and at age 11, when they are already thinking about their adult selves, we said, guess what? God has a plan for your life. And his plan for your life is wonderful. God knows more about what will make us happy than we know about it, right? And the happiest that we can be is doing what we're made for. In fact, that's something we very often say when we discover something that we love to do. We say, I was made for this, right? Right? And so at age 11, we want to make sure we talk about that. We want to make sure that we introduce, certainly, highlight consecrated vocations, matrimony, the priesthood, religious life. Maybe have some guests come into that 5th grade class who have chosen those vocations to talk about when they first heard God's call and what it's been like. But the other thing we want to do is talk about vocation with a small v too. God may call you to be a veterinarian or an attorney or a medical doctor, and all of those occupations can praise God doing what they do every day. All of them can work for the common good. And we want to talk about how that might happen and urge them to think about how do my dreams about my life and my talents fit into God's larger plan. In middle school, young people are focused here on identity development and belonging. They're beginning to ask some of those big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Am I cool enough? Do I look stupid? Do they think I'm a nerd? Is my hair in place? Those kinds of things. Oh, my daughter is in 6th grade now, and I mean, it's so much harder for us to get out the door. And she's like, Dad, does my hair look okay? Dad, my butt looks big in this, doesn't it? It's like, don't ask your dad that question. No, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with how you look. But she's concerned about it. She's concerned. She wants to look okay. She wants other kids to perceive her well. Kids are thinking about their identity. And the answer is always no. If somebody asks, is my behind like this? Always no, right? But kids want to know that they're okay. They want to know that that other people see them well and that they belong. And we got a great story to tell about that as a church. Because God has created each and every one of us in His own image and likeness, and we all belong to this family. This can be one place where they can all feel welcome and all feel like they belong. In high school, there's this process of differentiation, especially from the primary adults in their lives. That begins really, much earlier, but it really comes to full force in high school. And it's natural. It's a natural process. If we didn't push back against some of the things that our parents think and do in high school, we may not feel capable of being functioning adults autonomously on our own when we leave home, right? And so there is this kind of, I have my own ideas and I have my own plan. We hope that doesn't, go in a crazy direction, right? But but they need to have their own stuff. And this is also a time where they're asking a lot of questions. And we want to welcome those questions. We want, this is a time where they sometimes have to wrestle with questions of faith to make the faith their own, to decide, is this just my mom and dad's faith, or is this what I believe, right? And so we want to welcome that. We want to urge our catechists to, if kids are asking questions that you're not prepared to understand, you're not prepared to answer, to just say, that's a good question. And I am not prepared to give you a full answer to that right now, but let's keep that question open. Let me do a little research, right? The worst thing we can do is either just shut that down or give a quick pat answer that's going to be unsatisfying for that young person, because then they're going to think our faith doesn't offer a good answer to that question, right? So we want to let them do that. They're also, again, I told you that's that other window at age 17 where they're thinking of their adult selves. So we want to come back to that theme. Who are you? What's God's plan for your life? What do you think he's called you to? What do you love? Where is your heart? What are you good at? Those are all questions that we can begin to kind of talk about with them, because our talents and our gifts are clues to God's plan for our life. So in all of this, putting all of that together in terms of developmental appropriateness, I would say knowing how children develop and learn at particular ages and stages and creating learning environments that are responsive to those general needs is what we mean by developmentally responsive catechesis. And that's why we do have to make some space for age-level catechesis, even as we work with whole families and whole communities in formation too. Also, because every child is unique, knowing the individual children and how they learn best is essential. Knowing the gifts and the areas of need. And Dr. Beth Potts is going to talk a little bit about creating, about universal parish design, creating environments where everybody feels welcome and can share their gifts, and where we meet one another's needs as well. And that's important, because we don't want to assume that every child develops on this neurotypical trajectory. I have a daughter who is on the autism spectrum. And, that means that in some ways she is behind other kids her age. In some ways, she's also ahead of other kids her age. So it's not quite exactly this trajectory that I've talked about, although some of it is. So that's a good beginning place, but we have to get to know each child individually. And then finally, it's important to know what's culturally appropriate for different ages and stages of development, because that can express itself different within various cultural contexts as well. One thing I'm really excited about as I close here is that the USCCB, the Institute on the Catechism, released the Handbook on the Catechetical Accompaniment Process last year, which is a set of goals, cognitive, interior life, and behavioral goals for different ages and stages. And I was blessed to be asked to be part of the development of that handbook. And one of the things we really made an effort to do was, for the first time, to organize the criteria, the goals that we have for religious education based on developmental responsiveness and those windows of opportunity that I was talking to you about. So in that handbook, especially in those introductory sections to each age group, you'll hear some mention of windows of opportunity, what's happening in that child's development, and why these are appropriate goals for this particular age group. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's available in the PDF form on the USCCB site, as well as on the Institute on the Catechism site. And you can also get a hard copy on Amazon, which makes it a little easier to navigate through. But I encourage you to look at that. And yeah, sure, Marilyn.
And the Hot Off the Presses was approved this week based on feedback that we got from diocesan and parish folks. There's another document coming out. It's the companion to this that's written specifically with that parish and diocesan person in mind. Because this one was really geared primarily for the publishers.
Right.
So that companion document, which I believe you worked on as well.
Yeah, and
it was approved.
It helps those catechetical leaders know how to dive into the goals that are in the handbook through their lens, and how to kind of reflect on that. And one of the things that you'll want to do that I think is a good idea, we've got a number of publishers here and out there in the Catholic world in the United States that have employed folks that are skilled in child development to put their curricula together. It would be great to talk with them about how it reflects those developmental windows. I oversee the development of curriculum at OSV, for example, and our Alive in Christ curriculum really is based on these developmental windows that I'm talking to you about. But it's not the only one out there that's correlated. So I just want to put a good word in for them, because I think it's an argument for using a catechetical series as our anchor. That doesn't mean that it's not necessarily developmentally appropriate to sit around a table and read through and work in every page in a workbook. We want to make it multisensory. We want to make it active learning. So ask those publishers, what adaptations do you have online for making this multisensory and an active learning approach? But the content itself kind of helps us stay anchored in a developmental model. So I'm not ready to throw away all the books yet. Even if I wasn't working for a publisher, I'm not ready to throw them all away yet. Thank you, and God bless you.
So, again, Elizabeth's profile is in your book, and when I asked her, I thought this is, of course, is what she's going to say. She said, engagement is a non-negotiable. Engagement is a non-negotiable, and she's going to...
Yeah. Well, and I said it in one word, and he said it basically in a lot more words. But I answered first.
You were more concise, which we value.
I didn't want to bring up that comparison.
No, I thought that it was really funny because I replied first and I gave that answer, but that's like all of the reason why. It's all of the reason why you've got to have it. So one of the things when we think about the future, we also think about the things we've been working on in the past, because in my world is disability-based. My personal background is special education, and I spent 17 years, I tell people I'm a recovering academic, because I taught teachers, future teachers and current teachers, how to work with learners with disabilities. And shifted over to this, which is teaching you all and giving you all tools and helping you all work with persons with disabilities in your parishes and in your dioceses. And really, we're working on a lot of the same things, whether it was public ed, whether we're talking about catechism. But in the churches, we have a bigger issue also. And that's what we need to make sure we're focusing on as we move forward. And that is, we don't necessarily have parish environments where we have everyone that we should. So we have been working on an initiative called Thriving Conversations. I should have made sure I knew the right title before I said that. But it includes something that's related to parishes as everyone's home. And these are my two lovely children from many years ago.
Gave them away?
Well, it's a picture, it's an old picture. But what's happening in this picture is our parish was getting ready to have a big building project. And they invited the parish community to come and help with the groundbreaking. They said, bring a shovel and come, and all of us are gonna break the ground for this building project. And my kids at the time were 3 and 5-ish. I can't remember exactly what year it was, 3 and 5-ish. And it was a true community event. And it was pulling in all of the people in the parish and giving them ownership. Nobody was excluded. They went out of their way to try to make sure that we knew. All we had to do was bring the shovel. They said, if you don't have a shovel, bring a spoon, just bring something that you can dig with. And they used that to create community. Because community is very, very important to building all of those pieces that we need to build, and to have kids have that attachment that we're going to build on, and hopefully will help them maintain that relationship with the church for the rest of their life. My children think they own our church, by the way. They are more confident in our church building than they are almost anywhere else in their worlds. And a huge piece of that is that strong link with community. So if you think about, it skipped one. Oh, no, it didn't skip one. I just forgot that I put that right there. So unfortunately, though, we only have the community that makes it through our front doors. And our front doors don't open for everybody. Or people don't think they're going to be open for them, so they don't even try. Can't water quite that far. So we're going to talk about barriers, and we're going to talk about elimination of barriers so that we have that whole community. So if you were to take a guess, in your catechetical program, how many learners have you had with disabilities that require adaptation?
20.
20, and how many are in your program total?
Youth ministry and faith formation, probably 110.
Okay,
-ish.
that is a beautiful ratio. That's a beautiful ratio. And an unexpectedly beautiful ratio, honestly. So fabulous, Lisa. Yeah.
Well, we
Good-
happen to have a differently abled teacher specifically for our elementary. So
Yeah. So
she's drawn.
they have put some effort into some of the things we're going to talk about that help eliminate barriers. Anybody else?
Yeah, we have about 5 children with different in different areas.
Yeah. Out of
About
ballpark.
130.
Okay. So a lot of parishes say 0 to that question. We did a survey early in 2024, and that's how I can tell you that a lot of parishes say 0 to that question. And statistically, that shouldn't be the answer. Statistically, that shouldn't be the answer, and that's what I was saying with Lisa with that ratio, because statistically, maybe about 20%. So what often happens when we say 0, but we still think we're serving our community, we have blinders on. And his blinders are not huge, but I just thought that he was more beautiful than the other horses I could find pictures of. But we say we have the people who come to us, and so we're doing what we should be doing. And we kind of ignore the fact that, well, maybe there are people who would come if we made it more clear that we want to meet their needs and we would meet their needs. Because if you ask any catechetical leader, they're going to say, well, yes, if somebody came to me, of course we're going to make adjustments, we're going to make adaptations, we're going to do what we need to help that child learn about God. But if we're not doing that and making it clear that we would do it and encouraging the broader community to come in, then we're just sitting here with our blinders on, kind of in our happy world. And we have a lot of barriers stand between an individual with a disability or who has a family member with a disability and coming into many of our parishes. So some possible barriers. What's the first barrier that comes to mind when you think about why somebody may not come or go to a particular parish? Ramps, physical access, right? Architecture and physical access is a big, giant barrier. And it's easiest to think of that one first because the door, right? Getting into the door. We have a lot of old parishes. And we think it's not possible. It's always possible. It's just how ugly the possible might be and how expensive the possible might be. But it is always possible. And architects don't like to do things that are ugly, and we don't want to encourage them to do things that are ugly to our parishes. But we also often stop the problem solving way too early in the process. And allow them to remain barriers. When we talk physical access, we don't mean just literally getting in the door, though. We also mean, having a space to be for Mass. We mean being able to access rooms where things are happening. So if you have no rooms that are accessible to somebody who uses a wheelchair or crutches, then that's not something that a person can participate in if they have that physical need. Bathrooms. How many of you have never used the bathroom in your parish? Well, if you work there, I really expect the answer to be none of you, right? But if you are ever going to hold something that's any length of time, and you expect someone who has a physical disability to be able to come and feel like they could come, but you don't have a restroom they can use, then you're giving them a reason to be concerned about coming. And that's something that we very seldom think about. Very seldom think about. We'll move on from physical health. An environment that does not match needs beyond physical. We talked about physical already, right? So what could that possibly mean? An environment that doesn't match your needs. It was really, really warm in here earlier. Really warm in here earlier. And there are some disabilities that come with a dysregulation in temperature. So if you have a very unregulating HVAC system, that could be a barrier for somebody. Or like employees, yes.
We're getting ready to install a new one, and it's been tough.
Well, good. I am excited for you and your new HVAC system. When we can most easily identify, I think, in Mass, because we know that we have things in Masses that can be startling, like bells, incense.
Bees, we had a bee problem. Bees were fine.
Bees, okay, I'm going to give you that one because I got to tell you, anything flying around my head is going to freak me out, and I am probably never coming back. So just so you know.
So just like too many lights, or like especially for kids sometimes with autism, like this kind of like a overstimulation with different.
Yeah. Well, and light is an interesting one. Because there are some people who are extremely sensitive to extremely bright light. And there are some people who are sensitive to or cannot see well if the light is too low.
Yes.
So you can have people who have vision issues if you've got really low light. And the older we get, the more we will all understand that. And so with a lot of environmental pieces, you're going to have people who are sensitive to poles, which is a hard thing to balance and navigate. I don't have an answer for you, but it's a hard thing to balance and navigate. I think those were the ones I wanted to make sure to talk about there. Oh, another piece to just kind of environment in general is to have that full communion and community. We have to have social opportunities, and social opportunities that are accessible for everyone. And I was talking extensively with somebody downstairs about this. Anybody who has a hearing impairment is going to struggle with most of your social opportunities because they're loud. And you have, if you are an amazingly accessible parish, you have something in place in the worship space to assist them in hearing Mass, but that almost never transfers or translates into an accommodation anywhere else in the parish building. And so participation in other things is going to be difficult for that individual. So with catechesis, being able to come and hear, and especially if we have that lively classroom where we're doing a lot of things, it's going to be more difficult for somebody to participate. Okay, I think that was my last one I wanted to make sure to talk about on that. This one on the survey, I can't tell you how frustrated I was every time I saw this comment. People in parishes are very frustrated because individuals don't tell the parish what they need. People with disabilities are incredibly frustrated and demoralized by the fact they have to keep asking. Like, I have to ask for something that should be basic need, and you've thought about for other people. But because my need is different, and that is very off-putting for some individuals. And if it applies to one person in the family, the whole family is going to be missing. So we're missing those kids in catechesis. So what we're going to talk about makes it clear and open that we are removing barriers. And so then you don't have to rely on them to tell you what they need, because we've removed some barriers anyway. And if you remove enough barriers, people are more comfortable asking for things because they know that this is something that's important, it's a value that's reflected, and they're going to have, it should be received warmly. And then we also have a culture of assuming can't, and it's the parish that we assume we can't do that. We can't be creative in finding a way. We can't change one of our masses. One single thing about the mass, like we just can't. We cannot eliminate bells from one of our masses because the whole world would implode. By the way, people with tiny babies would appreciate it also, just saying, because the bells are very startling. But persons with disabilities also often assume can't. And that's another reason they don't necessarily tell you what they need, because they assume the answer is going to be no, like they can't do this for me. Which is one reason, if you do some things, that completely changes the narrative and opportunity and possibility. So we use the word can't literally in our language, and then we also do it in our actions by not going out of our way and trying to eliminate barriers. So universal design for parishes is the framework to eliminate barriers. And we've been using the language belonging a lot because that's one of the ultimate realities of being a part of something, is feeling belonging. And so that's kind of a goal, is feeling belonging. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. I guess I'm surprised that it's later in your presentation. I apologize. I would thought that one of the number one barriers, particularly for catecheses, is that our catechists, and I think this transfers to into Catholic schools, don't have the formation of how to catechize when you have a child who has special needs, like whether it's autism, ADHD.
I think more is the willingness to believe they can, and not necessarily formation to be able to. Because if you have a willingness to believe that you can change something to make it accessible, then you can, right? Like, so many catechists I talk to are scared. They're scared of having a learner in their class that they don't know what to do with. And they're scared of saying something wrong, doing something wrong. Okay, well, tell me, what does this learner struggle with? Oh, well, mom says that she can't read. Okay, so you just don't make her read, right? Like, there are things that if we demonstrate a willingness to adjust and adapt, and we feel empowered to, we feel like we have permission to, because that's another one that they don't use those words, but they feel like they have to do things a certain way. So if they feel empowered to adjust what they do, and they feel they have anybody tell them that you can do this, then I have no doubt many of them could be successful with most learners.
Can we hang on to the questions?
Okay.
Can we hang on to the questions?
Okay.
Just until let's let Elizabeth, unless you want to go down. But if you want to finish your highlight your points. And
We'll
then,
talk about the categories of removing some barriers, because it's in there. And then we'll do that. There are some things you can't eliminate. So universally being, we're going to do some things as a culture, and that is going to eliminate most of the barriers. And it's barriers to the family coming in as a family, and then getting children working on sacraments, children getting their other catechesis as well. And so we've got Eric Carter and his colleagues define 10 dimensions of belonging. And actually, Eric and I had a conversation last month, and he said, I'm not sure we got them really right. And I said, that's okay, because I combined them into 6. And because I was like, 10 was just too many for our purposes. And so we've combined them a little bit. But to be able to belong, to be able to be catechized, also, you have to be able to be present. You have to be invited in some way. And that's a big gap for a lot of kids with disabilities and catechesis. Especially if the disability is visible. If you never approach that family about catechesis, there's a very big possibility that the family is going to assume that they are not welcome and included, and that their child is not welcome and included. And they may not dip the toe in the water to ask. More assertive, more advocating parents absolutely are going to, but not all. And especially in some cultures, they are not going to be the ones to reach out to you unless it's very clear in some way that their child is included in that global invitation. Need to be welcomed and known and accepted. Known and accepted. So I know you, I know what you need. I'm not trying to change you. We're not trying to pray away your disability because we accept you for who you are. And then supported and cared for. We're doing what you need to be able to learn and engage in this catechesis. We're talking children. And we're providing them opportunity for social connections and to feel needed, which is where we get into the gifts. So we broke these down into 4 areas of parish life. And if you think that this is the only one that's important for you all, it's not. It's not. Checking my time. Okay. It's not. All 4 of them are important because if you don't have access, then we don't have anything else. Hospitality. Hospitality is going to go a long way in there being that environment where families know that they're going to be well received here. It's part of that we're engaging with everyone, and they are comfortable, and they know we are comfortable with them. It's some of those little pieces and things where we're meeting you where you are. We're making sure that when we send out those invitations or we send out information about catechesis, it's in formats everyone can use, whether that's a variety of languages, whether that's making sure that if we have images, there's all text, and legible fonts, please, high contrast, please. Again, just even as I'm getting older, like there's so many things that are hard for me to read, which I don't admit that to everybody. And all of that really falls into hospitality, because it's how we are presenting ourselves to the world and trying to welcome others into the world. Not having that child with a disability sitting off at a table by themselves, but incorporating them fully into that classroom. And then the gifts piece, we might have catechists with disabilities. We might see adults who have disabilities and encourage them to be catechists if they have that gift or that interest. And certainly, we need to make sure that all of our learners, we're helping them develop their gifts and try out different things so that they can be learning and deciding and determining how they can be giving back to the church and using what they know and what they can do in service to the church. So in our full blown out model, there's a cross section between each of these, and lots and lots of detail. But essentially, if we are ensuring that the parish as a whole is eliminating as many barriers to being present, to being engaged, to belonging with the church, then we are going to have our full communion with all of the body of Christ, because persons with disabilities and their families will be able to be in our parish and receive what they need and contribute and be a part of that global thing. And so we'll go ahead and stop there.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. One quote. There you go.
You want
That's
to
it.